AccuRide Wheel End Solutions is your only single source for industry-leading wheel end solutions. This video is one in a series to show you the correct method for installing and properly maintaining your AccuRide and GUNITE brand wheel end components to ensure their maximum performance. Our GUNITE brand product line includes 100% made in the USA brake drums, disc wheel hubs, and rotors for a range of commercial vehicle applications. Our commitment to deliver dependable performance is the hallmark of our full line of automatic slack adjusters. Our slacks are proudly assembled in Rockford, Illinois, and are proven reliable in countless miles of service. Here you will learn to install, adjust, and maintain your genuine GUNITE automatic slack adjuster. Let's start with the basics. An automatic slack adjuster is a wheel end component that serves as a lever to actuate the brakes. Its arm is fastened to the pushrod of the air brake chamber using a clevis, and it's mounted on the S-cam brake camshaft using a splined gear. The primary purpose of the slack is to convert linear force from an air brake chamber's pushrod into torque, which then rotates the camshaft. This forces the brake shoes against the brake drum to supply stopping power. The slack's second job is to maintain a reasonable clearance between the brake linings and the brake drum, while staying within the pushrod stroke limits for producing sufficient braking capability. GUNITE offers a complete line of unhanded automatic slack adjusters for installation on steer, drive, and trailer axles. There are two models to choose from: our standard genuine GUNITE automatic slack adjuster and the GUNITE 2000 model. GUNITE's standard model is designed for use with brake chambers that utilize a threaded pushrod and clevis attachment with a 1.02-inch pin center distance. The GUNITE 2000 model is designed to be used with brake chambers that have the clevis welded to the pushrod and have a 1.3-inch pin center distance. The two models are not interchangeable. Let's take a closer look at some of the features and benefits that make GUNITE automatic slack adjusters among the best in the industry, providing consistent brake adjustment for optimum brake performance. First, our unique clearance sensing design allows adjustments based on the actual shoe-to-drum clearance and is not sensitive to air pressure history. GUNITE utilizes a decoupling 90-tooth cone clutch design that provides small incremental adjustments, providing a more consistent shoe-to-drum clearance. In addition, our use of Belleville springs enables our slack to produce a large load under small movement in smaller spaces, without fading over time. This makes it possible for our slacks to have a smaller overall housing size. This allows us to clear adjacent chassis components and fit applications where our competitors may not. GUNITE's automatic slacks adjust on the first 10 psi of the apply stroke of the brake chamber, so it doesn't react to heat expansion of the drum encountered during any single brake application. And the operation of the adjustment isn't dependent on the condition of the air chamber or brake shoe return springs. GUNITE's drilled worm gear design allows for easier lubrication of the S-cam splines to help prevent the slack from seizing. And because GUNITE's automatic slack adjusters are unhanded, they can be mounted on either side of the axle. This means fewer part numbers to order and inventory to stock. External brackets are not needed for operation. All manual and automatic slack adjusters make adjustments through the rotation of a worm shaft and worm gear. GUNITE's slack adjuster design gets its motion to turn the worm shaft from the change in geometry between the clevis and the slack adjuster body. When it rotates, the clevis pulls up on the link. The link connects to the worm shaft through a slot in the link and a tab on the drive. The clearance between the tab and slot allows for a controlled amount of actuation, without rotation of the drive and worm shaft. This clearance corresponds to the nominal running clearance between the brake lining and the brake drum. As the brake is released, the one-way ratchet repositions for the next application. If the brake is already in adjustment, the lining contacts the drum, opens the clutch, and prevents worm shaft rotation as brake actuation continues. Let's turn now to the proper procedure for installing GUNITE's standard slack with a collar lock clevis. Refer to the GUNITE ASA service manual for the threaded clevis installation process. Before starting work on the vehicle, be sure to wear proper protective equipment, such as safety glasses. Next, block the vehicle's wheels. If the axle is equipped with spring brakes, Manually cage the brakes following the manufacturer's recommended procedures. Check the operating condition of the foundation brakes, including the drums, shoe and lining, cams, bushings, rollers, and other components. Replace or repair worn components as needed. Next, remove the existing clevis and slack adjuster, keeping the existing mounting hardware. Do not remove the jam nut. Verify the style of clevis needed to ensure the proper GUNITE automatic slack adjuster. There are two collar lock clevis designs, standard and extended. The extended collar lock clevis is intended for use with trailer axles and should not be used on front steer or rear drive axle applications. The extended clevis may interfere with the face of the air chamber. Apply anti-seize to the chamber pushrod threads into the camshaft splines before installing the new slack adjuster. Place the 1 1/4 inch collar nut on the pushrod against the 15/16 inch jam nut. Next, thread the 3/4 inch hex nut onto the pushrod. Install the slack onto the camshaft using the original mounting hardware. Be sure to use at least one inner washer aligning the center of the slack to the center of the pushrod. Next, install washers on the outside, leaving enough room to install the snap ring on the camshaft. There should be no more than a 0.06 inch movement of the adjuster on the camshaft. Using a 7/16 inch wrench or socket, adjust the slack so that the collar nut aligns with the threaded area of the clevis. Do not use an air impact wrench, as it can damage the clutch. Before attaching the 1 1/4 inch collar nut to the clevis, check to make sure the threaded pushrod is fully engaged in the 3/4 inch hex nut. If the pushrod does not have full engagement, install a new pushrod and cut it to length. Instructions for this step appear later in this video. The pushrod may extend up to 1/16 of an inch past the clevis opening. If the pushrod extends more than this, mark the pushrod and remove the clevis to allow the pushrod to be cut to the proper length. After threading the 1 1/4 inch collar nut onto the clevis housing, place the template over the large and small clevis pins. Align the slack by adjusting the 3/4 inch hex nut on the pushrod until the correct centering hole on the template aligns with the center hole on the camshaft. Using a torque wrench, tighten the 1 1/4 inch collar nut to the clevis using 40 to 50 foot-pounds of torque. Once the collar nut has been properly tightened to the clevis, tighten the 15/16 inch jam nut against the collar nut, again using 40 to 50 foot-pounds of torque. If the jam nut is not properly tightened, it will allow the air chamber pushrod to rotate in the clevis. This will change the installed position of the slack and prevent it from functioning properly. At this time, fully apply the brakes to ensure that the slack clears other adjacent chassis components. Then release the brakes. Once you have verified the clearance, it's important to do an initial brake adjustment. Adjust the brakes using a 7/16 inch wrench or socket. To achieve good leverage, we recommend an 8 inch swivel head, 3/8 inch drive ratchet with a 7/16 inch short socket. Rotate the hex extension clockwise until the brake linings make contact with the braking surface of the drum. Then back off the slack by rotating the hex extension counterclockwise a half turn. When backing off the slack, you should hear a ratcheting sound. This will require 30 to 50 foot-pounds of torque on a new GUNITE automatic slack. Once the brakes are properly adjusted, refer to the section later in this video on power stroke inspection. Let's turn now to the proper procedure for installing the GUNITE 2000 model slack adjuster, designed for use with air chambers that have a welded clevis. Welded-on clevises have a 1.3 inch pin center distance. Because the proper mounting angle has been designed into the product, it is not necessary to use an installation gauge on this setup. Before starting work on the vehicle, be sure to wear proper protective equipment, such as safety glasses. Block the vehicle's wheels. If the axle is equipped with spring brakes, manually cage the brakes following the manufacturer's recommended procedures. Check the operating condition of the foundation brakes, including the drums, shoe and lining, cams, bushings, rollers, and other components. Replace or repair worn components as needed. Next, remove the existing slack adjuster, keeping the existing mounting hardware. Apply anti-seize to the camshaft splines. Install the slack onto the camshaft using the original mounting hardware. Be sure to use at least one inner washer to align the center of the slack to the center of the pushrod. Install washers on the outside, leaving enough room to install the snap ring on the camshaft. There should be no more than a 0.06-inch movement of the adjuster on the camshaft. Next, using a 7/16-inch wrench or socket, rotate the hex extension clockwise until the holes in the GUNITE 2000 are properly aligned with the corresponding holes in the welded clevis. Because there is no clevis attached, you must hold the link in place while rotating the hex extension clockwise, or it will travel away from the slack adjuster body. Failure to do so can cause the link to disengage from the clutch drive. Once the holes are properly aligned, insert the proper clevis pins and secure with cotter pins. Next, fully apply the brakes and allow the chamber pushrod to travel its maximum stroke. Clearance must exist between the GUNITE automatic slack adjuster and all of the adjacent chassis components. Then release the brakes. To adjust the brakes, use a 7/16-inch wrench or a socket. Rotate the hex extension clockwise until the brake linings make contact with the drum's braking surface. Then back off the slack by rotating the hex extension counterclockwise a half turn. Backing off the slack will create a ratcheting sound. This will require 30 to 50 foot-pounds of torque on a new GUNITE ASA. Once the brakes are properly adjusted, refer to the section later in this video on power stroke inspection. Once your genuine GUNITE slack is installed, it's important that you maintain them properly to ensure optimal performance. GUNITE automatic slack adjusters are factory lubricated and sealed to help protect against dirt, road debris, water, and other corrosive elements. However, we recommend periodic lubrication at least every 6 months or 50,000 miles using an NLGI 1 or 2 grade grease that has an operating range that reaches as low as -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not use greases containing molybdenum disulfide, MOLY for short, as these can negatively affect the function of key friction components and reduce the slack's operating efficiency. To maintain their performance, foundation brakes should be checked every 3 months or 25,000 miles. This includes the drums, shoes and linings, cams, rollers, bushings, and other components. Check for worn clevises or clevis bushings, replace as necessary. After allowing the brake drum to cool to ambient temperatures, check for correct chamber stroke. Due to different operating conditions, chamber stroke tests may be necessary at earlier intervals. To perform a power stroke inspection, block the vehicle's wheels. The brakes must be in the fully released position, and the spring brakes must be uncaged. Using a ruler, measure the distance from the face of the air chamber to the center of the large pin in the clevis. Apply the brakes with a 90 to 100 psi brake application and hold. Then take a second measurement from the face of the brake chamber to the center of the large pin in the clevis. The pushrod power stroke value is the difference between the first and second measurements. The pushrod stroke should not exceed the maximum stroke limit shown here. Be sure to use the correct corresponding chamber size for the stroke limit. Now let's review the procedure for cutting a threaded pushrod. When a brake chamber has a threaded pushrod that needs to be cut, begin by mounting the brake chamber in the proper mounting holes of the chamber bracket for the specific length required for the GUNITE automatic slack adjuster. If the axle is equipped with a spring brake chamber, manually cage the spring brakes. For caging and torque specifications, follow the manufacturer's recommended procedures. Make certain that the chamber is in the fully released position. Using a square, mark the universal pushrod at the 90-degree position, when the square edge is centered in the end of the S-cam. Make sure the pushrod is precisely centered in the chamber and not at an angle before marking the pushrod. Now, from the 90-degree mark, measure backward toward the air chamber the proper X distance, as shown in this chart, marking the X dimension on the pushrod. Then cut the pushrod at this mark. The clevis is now ready to be installed onto the pushrod. When servicing the brakes or removing the brake drum, following the next steps will help you ensure that the slack adjuster is functioning properly before the vehicle is returned to service. The first step is to block the vehicle's wheels. If spring brake chambers are used, Manually cage the spring brakes following the manufacturer's recommended procedure. Next, using a 7/16" wrench or socket, rotate the hex extension counterclockwise. You should have resistance of at least 15 foot-pounds and hear a ratcheting sound as you rotate the hex extension. Do not use an air impact wrench on the 7/16" hex to prevent damaging the clutch. Back off the adjusting hex just enough to allow the drum to clear the lining, then remove the brake drum. Once you have removed the brake drum, rotate the hex extension clockwise until the cam turns over. This will allow the brake rollers to be in the release position. Proceed with the lining change or brake drum replacement. After this is complete, properly adjust the brakes using the procedure outlined earlier. Uncage the spring brakes and perform the power stroke inspection. Let's look at troubleshooting some common issues. GUNITE automatic slack adjusters are self-adjusting. This means that no manual adjustment is required except during the initial installation and at the time of a brake reline. It's important to recognize that when the pushrod stroke of a brake is longer than the adjustment limit, you've got a defective brake, rather than one that is simply out of adjustment, which may be the case when vehicles used manual brake adjusters, but it's not true for GUNITE automatic slack adjusters. There are a number of brake conditions that bear close monitoring. Brake problems could include the adjuster itself. For example, it might have worn linkage, pins, or bushings. If the pushrod stroke of a brake is longer than the adjustment limit, do not manually adjust your GUNITE slack. Doing so under these circumstances could have serious consequences, creating a false sense of security about the effectiveness of the brakes, which could go out of adjustment again soon. In addition, adjusting your GUNITE slack manually may result in premature wear of the adjuster itself. When troubleshooting, check the power stroke as previously discussed. You'll know that your GUNITE automatic slack adjuster is functioning properly if the 90 to 100 psi brake application is less than the maximum legal stroke limit, as shown here. If the chamber stroke exceeds the maximum legal stroke limit, you should take a free stroke measurement. Free stroke is the amount of movement the slack adjuster arm requires to press the brake shoes against the drum. With the brakes released, measure from the face of the air chamber to the center of the large clevis pin. Then apply pressure using a lever to activate the slack adjuster until the brake shoes make contact with the brake drum surface. Then take a second measurement. Free stroke is the difference between the released and the applied measurements. The free stroke should be between 3/8 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch. A dragging brake condition can occur if the free stroke is less than 3/8 of an inch. If this happens, repeat the manual adjustment process discussed earlier. If the free stroke is greater than the recommended distance of 5/8 of an inch, it is important to perform a function test of the GUNITE slack adjuster. To conduct a function test, place a 7/16" box wrench or socket on the hex extension and adjust the brake linings up to the drum, then rotate it counterclockwise 3/4 of a turn. A ratcheting sound should be heard. Mark the 7/16" hex extension with a paint pen or chalk, as shown here. Next, apply the brake several times, watching the hex rotation. The hex extension must rotate clockwise. The adjustment is intentionally made in small increments, so it will take several cycles to bring the adjuster within the maximum legal stroke limit listed in the chart. If the power stroke is greater than the maximum legal stroke limit, the free stroke is greater than 5/8 of an inch, and the function test shows that the adjusting mechanism is working, check the clevis pins, clevis pinholes, and the arm bushing for wear. If any of these components are worn, replacing them may bring the brake within the legal stroke limit. Now let's look at torque. You can check the clockwise and counterclockwise torque by attaching a torque wrench to the hex extension and turn it in the clockwise and counterclockwise directions, recording the measurement. The clockwise torque specification is a maximum of 10 foot-pounds. The counterclockwise torque specification is between 15 and 50 foot-pounds. If either of these torque specifications is violated, then you must replace your GUNITE automatic slack. If your GUNITE automatic slack adjuster passes the test for free stroke, function, and clockwise-counterclockwise torque, and the brake does not meet the maximum legal stroke limit, check the foundation brake. Review it for worn cam bushings, pins and rollers, broken springs or drums, and worn clevises, clevis pins, and arm bushings. Repair these as necessary and repeat the function test to see if your GUNITE automatic slack adjuster now meets the maximum legal stroke limit. If the clevis pins are seizing, this is often the result of corrosive environments. If seizing pins are a problem, they should be replaced with stainless steel pins. To learn more about the warranty for GUNITE Standard and GUNITE 2000 automatic slack adjusters, visit our website at www.accuridewheelendsolutions.com. Additional reference information is available in the GUNITE Automatic Slack Adjuster Service Manual and in the ATA Technology and Maintenance Council's TMC RP609. GUNITE Automatic Slack Adjusters. Quality you can depend on from AccuRide Wheel End Solutions.